Hello, good morning. Uh, well, I'm here also to make continuation about our presentation on the course Economics of Money and Banking, EAS 306. Today, we are going to look at the chapter 20, the ISLM model. We are trying to see here is that we are trying to see the determination of aggregate output, where the total quantity demanded of an economy's output is the sum of four types of consumption. That is, aggregate demand is equals to consumption spending, investment spending, government spending, and the net export, which is export minus import. And equilibrium in an economy is attained where the quantity of output supplied equals the quantity of output demanded. But the analysis assumes the price level is fixed in the economy. Consumption expenditure and the consumption function. As we have discussed earlier, that income is the most important determinant factor of consumption spending, where disposable income is total income minus tax, and the marginal propensity to consume is the slope of the consumption function, that is change in consumption divided by the change in disposable income, where the change in consumers' expenditure that results from an additional dollar of disposable income, where autonomous spending is that part of consumption spending or consumer expenditure that does not depend on disposable income, which is given by C equals to A plus MPC of YD. That is, even though at zero income, some level of consumption has to take place. From this table, we can see here that at E, even at zero disposable income, some form of consumption or consumer expenditure has to take place, where we can see in the graph at A. And at F, where disposable income is 400, change in disposable income is also 400, and so on, and change in consumer expenditure is 200, while consumer expenditure increased to 400. At G, to 800, 400, 200, 600, and at H, 1200, 400, 200, and 800. Here we can see that the autonomous spending at E does not start at zero, because even at zero disposable income, some form of consumption expenditure has to take place, where at F 400, at G disposable income 600, at H we have 1200 and 800 consumer expenditure. This is called the consumption function, where C is equals to 200 plus 0.5 of YD, which is this is the marginal propensity to consume of the disposable income. Investment spending. Here we know we have a fixed investment, always planned, and inventory spending can be unplanned. Planned investment spending can be interest and expectations. Keynesian cross diagram. Here we can see that in our earlier graph or consumption function graph, there was an autonomous consumption or expenditure. But here, looking at the 45-degree line, which is the aggregate demand, we can see here that some form of investment spending increase with 300, and this is our consumption function. When it is increased with 300, it becomes 500. That's why it becomes 500 plus aggregate demand is equals to C plus I, which is equals to 500 plus 0.5, which is the marginal propensity to consume of consumable income. We can see here is that U is equals to minus 100 at this point. At G, aggregate output increased from 800 to 1000, and this from 900 to 1000, and so also from 1000 it contracts. The aggregate output contracts from 1200 to 1000 at this at L. Expenditure multiplier. This explains a change in planned investment spending leads to an even larger change in aggregate output. How? Because an increase in planned investment spending leads to an additional increase in consumer expenditure, which raises aggregate demand and output further. That is, change in income is equals to 1 over 1 minus marginal propensity to consume, which should be less than 1 times change in income. So change in Y all over change in I is equals to 1 minus marginal propensity to consume. So now we are trying to see the response of aggregate output to a change in planned investment. Response of aggregate output to a change in planned investment. Initially it was 500, but it was 600 after the increase from 1 to 2. When it was 500, 1000 aggregate output or level of output was at Y1, but after 600, when it becomes to 600, the level of output will increase from Y1 to Y2 at 2.2, and this is our aggregate demand function at 45-degree line, and this is the initial aggregate demand function. This is the initial function, and this is the new one. Response of aggregate output to collapse of investment spending 1929 to 1933, during the time of Great Depression and 1929. This is our 45-degree line, as we all know. So how does the aggregate output respond to the collapse of investment spending? This was the initial at 1184, which is equals to Y1, but at point 2 it reduced to 832, where change in income reduced by 194. And this is our 45-degree line where aggregate demand. This is our initial function, this is our new function. Change in autonomous spending. Any change in autonomous spending will lead to a multiplied change in aggregate output. Change that is given by this formula. Change in Y is equals to A plus I of 1 minus MPC, which is the marginal propensity to consume, as we know. The shift in the aggregate demand function can come from a change in planned investment, a change in autonomous consumer spending, or both. A change in autonomous spending are dominated by animal spirit. Government role. The government role in an economy can be in form of government spending and taxes. So government spending and taxes can be used to change the position of the aggregate demand function from government spending adds directly to the aggregate demand, but taxes do not directly affect the aggregate demand. Why? Because if given by this formula, if taxes change, consumer expenditure changes in the position of direction, in the opposite direction. Change in consumption is equals to minus MPC times change in tax. So now we are going to look at the response of output to government spending and taxes. How does aggregate level of output respond to government spending and taxes? From here, this was the initial function at y ad1 equals to c plus I equals to 500 plus 1. So now, after an increase in government spending by 400 to 900, this was at point 2, where yd the new function. But later on, government decided to impose a tax, which is the difference between this 900 minus 700, which is equals to 200. So this is our new line at point 3 and new function. Therefore, what happens to the aggregate output? At point 1, it increases from 1000 to 1800. But after the imposition of tax, with minus 200, it decreases from y2 to y3 into 1400 or to 1400. Role of international trade. Here we are trying to see that what role does international trade play in an economy. A change in net export, that is export minus import, is positively related to change in aggregate output. This change in y is equal to change in net export. NX is net export times 1 over 1 minus marginal propensity to consume. Response of aggregate output to a change in net export. It means how does aggregate output behaves or respond to a change in net export. We can see here at point A or point 1, it was 500. But after 600 at point 2, it increased to what? 1200. This was the initial function, this was the new function, and this is our aggregate demand function. Here we are trying to summarize things that, or everything, that response of aggregate output y to autonomous change in AIGT and NX, that is net export. This is variable, change in variable, response of aggregate output and y. Autonomous consumer expenditure, which is A, when it increase, response of aggregate output also increase, as we saw in the previous diagram or figure or curve. Investment in I, that is investment I, when it increases, aggregate output also increases. Government spending, when it increases, aggregate output increases. But when tax is imposed, change in variable, that is increase, but aggregate output decrease, as we can see from here. Net export has also a positive relationship. When it increase, then response of aggregate output also increase. The ISLM model includes money and interest rate in the Keynesian framework. Examine equilibrium where aggregate output is equal to aggregate demand. Assume fixed price level where nominal and real quantities are the same. IS-curve is the relationship between equilibrium and aggregate output and the interest rate. LM curve is the combination of interest rates and aggregate output for which MD is equals to MS. It means money demand is equals to money supply. Equilibrium in the good markets, the IS curve. Interest rate and planned investment spending, negative relationship. They have negative relationship. Interest rate and net export, they have also negative relationship. That is, when one increases, one decreases, or when one decreases, the other one increases. The point at which the total quantity of goods produced equals the quantity of goods demanded. Output tends to move towards point on the curve that satisfy the goods market equilibrium. So we can see here is that from I1, I2, I3, from I1, I2, I3, this is the plot of interest rates against planned investment spending I. So at lower level of interest rate, more and more form of level of investment is achieved. But as the interest rate goes up, the level of investment decreases, and so on. When it goes to I3, the level of investment decreases. This proves the negative relationship between interest rates and investment spending or planned investment. So also here, interest rate is plotted against net export. At lower level of interest rate, the net export is more and more level of net export is achieved. But when the interest rate increased to I2, so also the net export decreases to NX2, and so also to NX3 when it goes to I3. Here at A, interest rates and planned investment spending. Here B, interest rate and net export. This is driving the IS curve in our figure 7. So now here we are going to drive the IS curve. Driving the IS curve, as we said, continued. At point 1, this is our 45-degree line where aggregate demand is aggregate output. At point 1 and Y1 equates at point 1 in the interest rate IS curve at lower level of interest rate. But mark you, this is the excess supply of goods region, while this is the excess demand of good region at point A, while this is at point B. So when you trace this point A down to this, we see that at lower level of interest rate, Y1 level of output is attained, so also Y1 level of output is attained. At point 2, so also Y2 level of output is achieved at certain level of interest rate also. So also at point 3, this is our initial function, new function, and so also the new function after the last one. This is just a summary. We have just explained this just now. Equilibrium in the good market for money, the LM curve. Demand for money calls liquidity preference, as we have explained earlier. MD over P depends on income, Y, and interest rate, I. positively related to income, raises the level of transaction, increases wealth, negatively related to interest rates. Equilibrium in the good markets for money. The LM curve continued. Connects points that satisfy the equilibrium condition that MD, that is money demand equals to money supply. For each level of aggregate output, the LM curve tells us what the interest rate must be for equilibrium to occur. The economy tends to move towards point on the LM curve. Look at it. This is interest rate, while this is money demand from 1, 2, and 3, where the money supply is fixed. Quantity of real money balances here, while this is interest rate is balanced again. This is money, this is market for money, or this is LM curve. At certain number of level of interest rate, this is 0.1, 0.2, and 0.3. That is, the money demand goes to the right, to the right, to the right, while interest rate is plotted against aggregate output. What happened at this level of interest rate? This is achieved, while at I2 at 0.2, this level of aggregate output is achieved, while at 0.3, this is excess supply of money region at point A, while at point B, this is excess demand for money, and this line is what we call the LM curve. So this is the IS LM curve simultaneously determination of output and the interest rate. At point A, the interest rate needs to decrease or reduced. At point B also, to achieve the equilibrium in the goods market. So also some form of aggregate output needs to be reduced in order to achieve Y star level of output. So also some form of aggregate output need to be increased in order to attain this at certain level of interest rate. And this is our LM curve. This is our IS curve.